So I just recently shot a full wedding with dual Fujifilm X100VIs. Let's talk about it. First of all, I'm going to talk about the gear, obviously, and then I'll go into the camera settings that I used and how I changed them throughout the day. I'll also go into the image breakdown and give you all the numbers of which lens I use the most and all that good stuff. And then finally, I'll go into the shooting experience. How did it fare? So first of all, let's get into the gear. So the main focus obviously are the dual X100VIs. I used one with a wide conversion lens and a Tele Conversion Lens. I also had a thumb grip on both of these cameras, and the thumb grip that I used was from Hi-Tut. I think that's how you say that name, but it's your generic, silver thumb grip. I also brought some extra batteries. I brought 8 batteries in total. I brought 2 4-pack batteries from Wasabi Power. For lighting, I brought with me a Meike MK-320F speedlight, which is a really small flash. And I had some accessory lighting from Godox. It's the small panels. They're called the No-LED CR5s. I brought 2 of those. I also want to mention a couple of other accessories. I needed to be able to carry 2 cameras with me, so I brought with me my trusty Holdfast Moneymaker. This one is in Water Buffalo Black. If you've watched my other videos, you know that I'm a Sony shooter, so I did bring my Sony cameras and lenses as a backup. And believe it or not, I ended up not using any of my Sony equipment for this wedding, so this will be a full Fujifilm X100VI wedding that I'm going to share with you. First of all, I shot all on RAW plus JPEG. The JPEG was just for backup, just in case. I was gonna shoot in RAW and edit in Lightroom to deliver to the client. So, the JPEGs were not necessary, but just a backup. I shot in aperture priority mostly, except for some instances where I shot fully manual with the flash. And then I had auto ISO, auto shutter speed, and yeah, so basically aperture priority. For my focusing settings, I used mainly a single point autofocus point, and I selected that using either the touchscreen or the joystick, and I shot either in single focus or continuous focus. I would switch back and forth depending on the scenario. For white balance, I shot in auto ambient priority. So it's an auto white balance, and it does, it tries to figure out what the ambient light is and tries to prioritize that. It's not that crucial because I am shooting RAW and I can change that later, but it's helpful to see on the screen, that it's just how the images look with auto white balance. I did tweak the auto white balance a little bit and made it warmer. So my tweaks were red +1 and blue -4. So what that does is just bumps the red a little bit higher and the blues a little bit lower, making it warmer. I did have a film recipe, baked into the JPEGs. It's not necessarily crucial. It's practically irrelevant because I was shooting in RAW and I was gonna, like I said, edit RAW images anyway. So this is my Fujifilm recipe that I used. Just if you're curious, it's just for the JPEGs and it's just for my previews, but it helps to have a nice looking preview and to inspire you as you're shooting. Now let's get into the image breakdown. So I want to share with you exactly how many images I shot and how many I delivered, and the breakdown of which lens I used the most, how many images from each lens that I delivered to the client, all that good stuff. First of all, raw ingest was 3,530. So 3,530 images that I shot, and that's everything from the full day of the wedding. After culling through all the photos and keeping my keepers, I ended up with 954 images for final delivery. So that is a keeper rate of about 27%, which in my opinion is pretty high. My previous keeper rate is about like 10%, and you might, I don't know, everyone is going to be a little bit different, but my style of shooting with Sony cameras, with this, I'm a little bit more deliberate. The focus system is not as fast as a Sony, I think that's what lends to that, you know, to that keeper rate. So just food for thought, but I thought that's worth it to mention. Out of the 954 images, I ended up breaking it down to the 3 different lenses. So I did use the 28mm equivalent, some of them without the conversion lens, so just your plain old vanilla 35mm equivalent, and also with the 50mm equivalent. Out of the 954 delivered images, 90 of them ended up coming from the WCL, the 28mm. Here are a few samples of those images. Like I mentioned, I also shot a few images, well, more than a few, with just the plain old 35mm lens. With this lens, I ended up delivering 147 images. Here are a few of them. You can kind of tell where the math is heading, and with the 50mm equivalent, I ended up delivering 717 images. Here are just a few of them. So I want to share with you a little bit of how I use the lenses throughout the day. Just a quick breakdown. I started with this combo, the 28 to 50, and I found that to be a very good combination. You got a wide and you got a tele. And then throughout the day, I changed just a little bit, but this is my main setup. The only time I changed this setup is when I went to the ceremony, and it was an outdoor ceremony, and I could walk, you know, to and fro a little bit more. I had a little bit more space, so I took off the WCL and I just opted for a 35 and a 50 combination, which is helpful because I need to get closer anyway to the bride and groom, closer to the action. And then I switched back to the 28 and 50 for family portraits after the ceremony. For the reception, I mainly used the 50 and a combination of the 28 and 35. So that is when I played around a little bit, depending on how much space I had. When I got into the dance floor, I definitely shot more with the 28. The 50mm is the outright winner for the wedding, and I could have probably guessed that going into it, but 75% at least of the photos were delivered using the 50mm. And like I mentioned earlier, when I can get close to the action, like let's say the dance floor, I can use the 28, and which is really helpful to using flash, because you can get closer and therefore your flash doesn't have to be as powerful, and that helps with a small flash like the Meike. So if you're closer to the subject and your flash power is lower, then you're able to recycle at a much faster rate. So how was it shooting with these two X100VIs? I'm going to go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'd like to start first with the ergonomics and usability. And I want to go with the negatives first and then build up to the positives. First of all, the battery life, it's not the greatest. You have to turn it off and on to save battery. The battery is so small. So battery life, downsides to this, you'll have to bring a lot of batteries. I brought with me 8 batteries and that lasted me throughout the day. That was just fine. But if you don't have enough batteries, you'll probably be anxious throughout the day. So make sure you have a lot of batteries. So at the time of shooting the wedding, I had the camera pretty much bare bones. I think I only had a thumb grip, and I didn't have this extended grip from Small Rig yet. It hadn't arrived yet. So this is not what it looked like. It looked a little bit different. Like I said, just no thumb grip. I think at the wedding, I could have definitely benefited from this extended grip from Small Rig, because this camera is really tiny, and the grip, there's not much to grip on there. I mean, you can you can, after a while, you'll know how to hold it and where to put your hand and your thumb. And but this definitely helps, so I wish I had it at the time of the wedding. So the thumb grip, as you can see, I don't have it on the camera right now because it fell off a couple times throughout the day during the wedding. And when it was time to put on the flash, since it's attached to the hot shoe, I can't use the thumb grip. So I had to take it off and, you know, put it in my pocket or put it in my camera bag and then put the flash on. And then when I took off the flash, then I put on, basically I was fiddling with that thumb grip. So I ended up not liking that thumb grip. Fiddling with a thumb grip to me is not ideal. I'd rather have an extended grip like this rather than a thumb grip. Really, with this and the combination of having to use flash, the thumb grip becomes, you know, more of a hassle. Now to the positives. I loved how lightweight this system is. They packed, and I mean Fujifilm, packed a lot of features into this tiny little camera. And a lot of people ask me, you know, is it worth it? You know, is this camera worth it? You could be looking for a camera with these features for a long time and not find anything under $2,000. And this is what's $1,700 for the price and the package, just how small it is. You really can't beat this camera. It's hard to beat. And like I said, it's so lightweight. I love that about it. At the end of the day, the next morning, you know, my neck was not in pain, you know, carrying these heavy cameras. So lightweight is a big plus. The tilt screen is very, very handy. I love the tilt screen, and I'm so happy that they didn't go to the flippy screen route. You know, really for me, when you're doing stills, a flip screen is it's very hard to manage. A tilty screen is a lot better because you can shoot low, you can shoot high, and the center of your image is centered to the lens. So it's just for me a better experience shooting stills. Next thing is the function buttons. I loved all the function buttons because they're customizable. Most of them you can customize to any type of function. Some of them are limited to a few standard settings. For me, I just have a handful of really necessary settings that I need to flip on and off at times. So the exposure lock, my white balance, my minimum shutter speed, my neutral density filter, all that good stuff is right, you know, within reach. So I have about maybe 5 to 7 custom functions that I need to use all the time. That part was really, really nice. One thing that I thought was really cool is you can use this focus ring and customize the function for that as well. You can, you know, if you want it to be for your white balance, you can use that for that. You can use it for a digital conversion, teleconversion, so you can punch in and get closer and crop into the sensor. I use it primarily for that. You have to be just very careful that you don't accidentally touch that and you're accidentally at 50 mil instead of 35 mil. But you can also turn that function off so you don't have that accident. But it's really nice to have that option. Now let's get into my thoughts about the focusing features of this camera. Like I said, I'm going to start with the negatives. In general, this Fujifilm system is not as fast as a Sony system. I would say that this camera is on the same level as a Sony A7 Mark III, and that was 2018, so 6 years ago from the time of making this video. And what is that? About 1 to 2 generations behind Sony. It's not bad. It's totally usable, I think, for a wedding. But when you start comparing it to what's out there right now, then you can kind of see where it is lacking. Also, the face tracking and that, you know, that whole system, the eye tracking is not as accurate as a Sony system. When you're on face tracking mode, it jumped out a lot and it got confused. It's not as efficient and it doesn't stick as well as the Sony eye tracking and face tracking. Overall, the focus is good enough. It's pretty good. It's great in great light. it's okay in okay light, and in bad light it's pretty bad, meaning it hunts a lot. There are ways to get around that with low light shooting and focusing, but it is a lot more work to do that. One subject I do want to get into is, I would say it's called subject interaction. How was the vibe, you know, with the client, and just having a different type of camera? Because nowadays everyone's using, you know, your mirrorless camera, like your DSLR, you know, style, but mirrorless. But this is a bit more like a rangefinder, old school vibe. I did get some heads turning, especially from, it's funny, it's usually from older folks who shot film, or for the younger folks who are getting into film, you know. So I did get a lot of people asking me about that. Since the camera is small and tiny, and it's quiet as well, so using it in stealth mode is really cool. I can get shots where I would just have it waist level and just flip the screen up a little bit, and some people won't even notice that I'm taking pictures of them. So I think that's a cool way to be incognito. The leaf shutter on this, by the way, is amazing. I love that. It's so quiet, and especially in moments where you cannot be loud at all, like at a ceremony, or someone is praying in a small room. You don't want to be, you know, clacking away with your big old shutter. And in fact, here is the sound of that. Can barely hear it. So this is probably one of the most important aspects of the camera, obviously, is the image quality. What type of images am I getting out of it? I would say, you know, just judging from what I'm showing you and what I got, my keeper rate, this has great image quality. So this is more than enough for a wedding. 40 megapixel sensor is nice. I love that you can crop down a little bit, even to, you know, half that size, to a 20 megapixel, and still have a very good deliverable image. I used mainly DR400, which is the dynamic range setting. That keeps your base ISO at 500. And what that does, even though you might be thinking ISO 500, that's pretty high, especially for outdoor settings. And that's why you have the neutral density filter. But keeping that dynamic range as high as possible, you'll have a smoother transition from the highlights to the shadows. So that's why I kept that dynamic range setting to the DR400, which is its highest setting. When I keep it at that, I didn't notice any, you know, negatives from having, you know, ISO 500. The noise levels is what I was kind of scared about going into this wedding, but it performed well. The noise levels are good. It's usable, especially for documentary. You have a little bit more threshold of what is acceptable, but noise levels are good. I thought ISO 3200 was useful. It's usable, and it's even usable up to ISO 6400. Anything over that, then it gets really, really grainy. So I would stay under 6400, and, you know, if you have to go over that, then, you know, just, you need some more light. Bust out the flash. All right, now let's get into the lenses. So like I said, I used these two conversion lenses, and I used the standard 35mm equivalent lens. I would say the conversion lenses are good. I would just say watch the corners, because that is the weak spot of these conversion lenses. The regular lens, the 35mm lens, is good, pretty sharp throughout, you know, all the corners and in the center, and especially if you stop down. I mainly shoot wide open, so I'm going to be watchful for those corners. I don't want to have anything crucial on those corners, because they're not that sharp in the corners. Like I said, the 35mm, you know, the standard lens on this is really good. I'm super comfortable shooting with that, and I would, you know, go crazy with the compositions. I don't mind having things on the edge of the frames for that lens, but you have to be very careful with the conversion lenses. Also, changing conversion lenses. Let's say I want to change, you know, from the 20 to the 35. It's not that quick. I wouldn't want to be doing that in the middle of a wedding ceremony. So what you need to do is make sure you decide on what lens you want to use. That's why it's good to have two, because that way you'll have a 50 or a 28 and a 35. But you just have to choose right in the beginning what you want to use, because you don't want to be changing lenses or screwing on these conversion lenses in the middle of something important. Now we're at the final part of this video, and I just want to give you my ending thoughts. First of all, the quality of the images you get out of this camera are great. I think this camera is more than capable, and you can deliver really awesome images to a client. And are there better choices for focusing? Yeah, there are better choices. Are there better focuses as far as flexibility and lens changing and all that? Yeah, of course. Are there better choices as far as image quality? You can use an A7R5 and have a 60 megapixel image. You can have an A1 and have faster focusing. In either one of those, you can change lenses. But that's not really why you're grabbing this camera. This camera is more for limiting yourself. When you limit yourself to a certain amount of tools and just box yourself in, there's a little bit of a freedom in that, because you are now able to stay more in the moment. There's something to be said about that, where you have too many options. This one, you really have no other option except for these conversion lenses. So you have really the three choices that you have, and that's it, really. I mean, you can do digital conversion, but other than that, I'm talking about just mechanically, feature-wise, what you have in your hand. It's kind of freeing to just have these two cameras, just around your neck or strapped around your shoulder and stuff. So you wouldn't be picking up this camera because you want the fastest, the best image quality. You know what I'm saying? You are going to choose this camera for the other reasons, for the limiting factors, helping you, rein you in, and limiting you. And like I said, that can be a good or a bad thing. I think this is a great camera if you just want to stay in the moment. And I know you can do that with any other camera, but this physically limits you. So like I said, not to beat a dead horse here, you're limited to the few choices that you have. And then what are you left with? You're left with yourself and your eyes, and just trying to see the moment and trying to capture the moment. You're not thinking about, I should change this lens or all that other stuff. So I think that is why you would pick this camera. This camera, though, is a bad choice if you want flexibility. If you're going to a situation that you're not comfortable with, and that's another thing. I'm comfortable with weddings. I can go in there probably with one lens if I want to and not feel anxious. As long as the client, the wedding couple is okay with me, like, getting close if I need to. So for me, I'm comfortable with this setup. But if you're a type of person where you get into a situation and you need flexibility because you don't know what will happen, this will give you, anxious thoughts maybe. I don't know. Well, but yeah, for flexibility, definitely a bad camera. So would I shoot with this again for a wedding? It depends. There are certain weddings where, like I said, if I need reach, this would not be a good choice for me. I think it would still be in my bag, and I probably will shoot with this like for the majority of the day, but I will probably have another camera on me with an 85 or a 35 to 150, so just so I have a longer reach. But yeah, I would probably still shoot with this, for the entire day, maybe with the 50, because like from looking at my images, I use this the most. 35 on it. I mean, I'm totally comfortable with that 28, 35 into 50 millimeter focal length. So I'll definitely shoot with it again, and maybe I'll have an A1 with me just for the ceremony, perhaps. Maybe for the portraits if I want even more blurrier, backgrounds. But if I had to shoot a wedding with just these two cameras, I guess that's a weird question. Definitely would. If your question is, can you shoot with this for a wedding? I would say definitely. And that's it for this video. Thanks for going along with me for the ride and listening to me ramble on. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again. Peace.